Okay, today we're going to talk about ethics in community and public health nursing practice. And this really is ethics in action that we do see every day. And I hope after today's talk, you can look at some of the things that are happening today, particularly in the era of this pandemic, where ethics and ethical thoughts and ethical action is required. So first of all, of course, we're going to look at our learning objectives today. We want to describe the nature of values, value systems, their influence on community health nursing. Articulate the impact of key roles on professional decision making, and that means, of course, your decision making as a nurse. Discuss the application of ethical principles to our practice, and you want to highlight ethical principles. You'll see this again on the exam. Use a decision making process with and for community health clients that incorporates values and ethical principles. So when we're out in the community, what is your ethical decision making when you look at what kind of interventions you need to put in place for your clients? So our values, beliefs affect our decision making, certainly in our everyday life, but more importantly in nursing practice. Every profession is going to have ethical codes that they use to guide that decision making. So certainly ANA, American Nurses Association, has a code of ethics for nurses that we are all, based on the fact that we're part of the practice, it reflect our current issues and ideologies of professional nurses. And I put a link there that goes to the ethics for nurses. I know that you've covered that, I believe, in your fifth semester and perhaps others. So the code is there. We're held as nurses to that, so it's worthwhile for all of us to at least be familiar with them. Now, community health nurses, public health nurses do face unique ethical conflicts where the needs of the individual must be evaluated in the light of the needs of the population. And again, I mentioned the pandemic and many of the things that are going on right now in terms of social distancing, wearing masks. We are always continuing to look at the greater good, which is the guide for many of the principles that the politicians who make some of the recommendations or guidelines use to make those decisions. Much of that decision making is looking at decisions, or the decision and the making of those decisions are based on the principle of what do we need to do for the greater good. And even though individual rights might be impacted, what is the greater good? So the advances in technology also contribute to ethical dilemmas. Again, in our face of pandemic, we're doing a lot remotely. Schools are doing distance learning. What if somebody does not have internet access, does not have a laptop or a computer? What happens to their quality of education? So ethical dilemmas always present themselves. Social justice, human rights, and equality are hallmarks of public health nursing ethics. So basically what this means in terms of making decisions in public health practice, a guiding principle for us is social justice, human rights, and equality. And not necessarily individual rights or what's best for the individual. Now, values. Values is a personally held belief that gives value to thoughts, objects, and behavior. So our personally held belief in something, whether it be a religious belief, whether it be an economical belief, whether it be a political belief. But these are our values. And they motivate people to behave in personally or socially preferred ways. Certainly some of the things we're seeing again now with much of the protests that's occurring throughout the nation in terms of lockdown laws or lockdown mandates, and wanting to express their personal belief or their personal value in individual rights. And so again, you see a conflict there. Values are learned, derived from societal norms, families, educators, religious beliefs. So just as culture is, values are learned, and we derive them from the society around us. Now, why are values our standards for behavior? Values functions as those guides for behavior for living, for us, for everyone to lead their life in the most healthiest and personal belief that is how they need to lead their life. So the guide for behavior comes back to values. Implications for us in nursing practice are that um, the guide for behavior, or the behavior that we see a person displaying, the behavior that we see a person displaying, particularly when it comes to health and health care, goes back to their values and what they hold strongly. So therefore, if we're going to try to intervene, we need to take in consideration those values and give them value and understand that they're important to that individual. Values are used to justify a person's actions and attitudes. The protesting, just the protests that we see, protesting some of the social distancing measures, the lockdown measures, those are values that they use to justify their actions and attitudes, the protesting. Values are standards for moral judgments, and values are used to set expectations for a society and the involvement in a society of different people. So they are definitely standards for our behavior, not only in nursing practice, excuse me, but in our everyday life. Qualities of values. How are values made up? What are the qualities? Well, we know that they do endure. They're consistent, they're remaining stable over time. Think about religious values. Those stay concrete over time on the most part. They're very consistent. We were raised Catholic or raised Jewish or raised Baptist, and those are beliefs and values that endure throughout our life. It's hierarchical. Some have more importance than others and must be weighed against each other. So doing things for the greater good must be weighed against individual rights. Hierarchical. They're prescriptive and proscriptive beliefs, so it's used to determine which behaviors are desirable or undesirable. Our values will tell us maybe when we should act in the future or what we should think about something in the future, or prescriptive. They're prescriptive for our behavior at the present moment. They give us reference. Reference quality. Terminal values refer to states of being. Example are of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those are very terminal. What Maslow displayed and what's the basic home, water, those type of basic needs always need to be fulfilled first. So they're very much give us a reference as nurses. And as we think about what to prioritize in nursing, that gives us a basis, that gives us a reference. Preference, show preference for modes of behavior. So because I believe something or I value something, it gives me a preference to show a certain type of behavior. A religious value shows the preference for praying or going to church or acting in a certain way. So a value gives us that preference about a behavior. Now, our value systems, organization of beliefs into a hierarchical system based on importance in guiding behavior. So our value system, the systems, we all know what a system is. A system's way of thinking is that everything is connected. You pull out something and it disrupts the system. So just like values, our values are as systems. And when we have something that comes to us that isn't within our value system, we're either going to adapt it to our value system or maybe change our value system. So it's a way to organize all our beliefs. Behavioral change is a result of reordering a person's value system. So it's not a negative if we reorder a value system. It's just going to help us change our behavior the way we want to. For instance, we value our ways of eating and our traditional ways of eating, yet some of those traditional ways can be detrimental to our health. So if we still continue to hold those traditional views, but yet are willing to put within our value system that we're not always going to subscribe to it, it's going to lead to some behavior change. And in nursing, and the implications of that in nursing are that one of the ways we can encourage behavior change to a healthier lifestyle through nutrition, through exercise, etc., is understanding what that value system is for that person. Decision making involves conflict between incompatible values. So many times that decision is going to make someone uncomfortable because it's a conflict between the value system that I hold dear with new information, and so we're going to need to make that decision. As values change, the decision making process also changes. So it's never static. Now, clarification of values. How do we make values clear not only to us but to others? So it's a process that helps to identify the personal and professional values that guide your actions. So as a nurse and as you head into nursing practice, values clarification is going to be so important to the pursuit of your nursing practice. What do you hold dear as value? And we're going to talk about some of those ethical principles, those values that we might have, and which ones do you base your practice on. It helps you understand where one value ranks against your other values. So is doing something for the greater good more important than respecting a person's right to autonomy? That's an example. I hold that value of greater significance to me. Autonomy is important, but yet it does not weigh as important as the greater good. It helps you clarify the difference between your values and external influences. Helps clarify the difference between your values and external influences. So let's think about the pandemic and the lockdowns many of the states are having right now. So although it may be contrary to your value of individual autonomy, you can make room to understand that it's for the greater good. It's for our community. It's for stopping the spread. It's for lowering the spread. So you can have those two things in your mind and make a decision accordingly, but it helps if you clarify those to yourself because it helps you be more comfortable with that decision. It helps establish consistent decision making. So individuals make choices when establishing values. It is a process, just as I was talking about a few minutes ago. Now, what are some of the strategies you can put in place? Think about how you can clarify your values as a personal values or as a nurse and a nurse professional. Strategies and tools can be used to establish what an individual or community values. It can be used by community health nurses to help the individual communities become clear about their own values, which is important in decision making. Values clarification also promotes understanding, respect for values held by others. You cannot give optimal care without first understanding your own values, of course. So, give you an example in San Antonio. 4 years ago, this involves politics and who we put in office to determine policy or to make policy. So in San Antonio, one of the things that happened is that a city council election was held. A lot of individuals won their election who valued equity in the budgeting process. So by electing those individuals and putting those individuals in office who have a philosophy of thinking about where the money in the budgeting process can be best spent to bring everyone up to an equal basis. By putting those individuals in office, you see some of the values of the community. The budgeting process could be as simple as, well, I'm not going to give money to this city council district as much to repair sidewalks because all their sidewalks are very, very good, but I'm going to give more money over here to bring up those sidewalks to code so that everyone has the opportunity to be as physically active, to be outdoors as possible. So by putting some of those policymakers in office, it certainly reflects the values that we as a community hold dear. Now let's talk about ethics. How does ethics fit into that? Set of moral principles or system of moral values, doing what is moral or good. Ethics is that system of moral values. So what do we value is our ethics. And the ethical decision making comes from making a choice that can be ethically justified. So based on those ethical principles of, say, for the greater good or do no harm, I'm going to make decisions accordingly. Now, bioethics are those ethical principles and methods of decision making in questions involving biologic, medical, or healthcare issues. So the issues that you will be making as a nurse professional when it comes to healthcare issues is put under bioethics, because I'm making these decisions, an ethical decision, in the frame of healthcare. Public health ethics. Protection, promotion of health are the core ethics of public health nursing. So at the core, what our practice as public health nursing commands us to do is protection and promotion of health. So all that we do and all the decisions that we make are based on the principle of protection, promotion of health. Ethical principles apply to both public health nursing. And the basic ethical principles of public health include promoting health promotion, protecting confidentiality, which of course is for all nurses and healthcare providers, equal access to resources, equal access to resources, not based on who can access care, who has the money, or who has insurance, equal access, and empowering the community. So one of the principles I subscribe to is that whatever I can do in terms of health promotion or health education to best empower that person or that community to protect their health is what's going to guide me. Ethical conflicts arise in public health when individual health interests conflict with public health interests and rights. And we can all certainly see that playing out right now with the issues that are required to mitigate the spread of COVID. Social distancing, wearing a mask, closing some of the stores and restaurants and businesses, and some of the economic hardship that has come from that. If a decision involves moral evaluation, it is an ethical decision. So if a decision involves moral evaluation, it's an ethical decision. So as a public health nurse, here are my values of health promotion, health equity, and access, or health equity and equality. If there is a value of also individual rights, I make a decision accordingly. That's going to be that ethical decision. Moral evaluations have relevance beyond the current decision. So think about triage. And right here, I've given a link to a podcast on some of the things that we might see play out because of the pandemic response. Do we start rationing personal equipment? Do we start rationing ventilators? Do we triage people in the emergency room who maybe have a stuffy nose and really want that COVID test, but we know that there are so many more that have very what we would consider obvious symptoms, and we have a shortage of tests. So all of those triage things that could be happening in the frame of COVID are certainly these moral evaluations that we're making that can lead to ethical decisions. So if you do have some time, it might be helpful for you to listen to that podcast. So how do we go about resolving our moral conflicts and ethical dilemmas? When a decision involves a conflict between a moral value, it is an ethical dilemma. Decision-making frameworks can be used to organize, develop thoughts, and act as a guide for a decision-making process. Additional ethics resources are available to aid in ethical decision making. Okay, so when a decision involves a conflict between those moral values that you hold, of course, it's going to be a dilemma for us to have. And those decision making frameworks we use to develop and organize our thoughts are going to help us make that decision. And certainly, most organizations, large health systems now have a bioethicist, someone who can help making those decisions. Maybe the chaplain, maybe a physician or a provider who has extra training in bioethics and ethical dilemmas. So there are resources that can be called, particularly within a large health system, that can help us make those ethical decisions when we face ethical dilemmas. So talk about those values now. Let's talk about them that guide that decision-making process. First of all, self-determination. An individual has the right to make decisions and pursue their own goals and plans. So if we believe in self-determination, that individual has the right to make the decisions they want to. Hands off, they can pursue their own goals and plans. Respect for autonomy plays a large part in this value. It results in increased personal well-being. So during this, a community public health nurse considered the choice of clients, their privacy, informed consent. So informed consent, and the reason we do informed consent is because that value that we hold of self-determination, that person can make their own decision about surgery, about a procedure. Diminished capacity for self-determination is something you want to start. This will be something you see on the exam. How do I identify this situation in which an individual has a diminished capacity for self-determination, and then what do we do as a result of that? How do we make decisions in the face of somebody having diminished capacity? Now, well-being. Well-being is a state of positive health. Promoting well-being is a basic value. Autonomy and well-being are related. So they're related to a respect for self-determination. We definitely want to prevent harm and provide benefits to clients. Determine the effectiveness of nursing services and weigh cost of services against real benefits. So if our fundamental value is health promotion, health protection, well-being is very important to us. And we always think of well-being as to prevent harm, do no harm. So in terms of modeling social distancing, wearing masks, taking the precautions that are needed to prevent the spread, those are important ways that we value preventing harm, although it may conflict with individual rights. Equity. We've talked about equity before. Equity or justice is the value of equal and fair treatment. So the treatment is equal, but it's also fair. All individuals should have the same access to health care according to benefit or needs. And we know right now not all people have the same access because of our system requires some kind of health insurance or at least payment for that, except in cases of an emergency. But economic feasibility is one problem with equity. We don't all have the same capability of having the same economic resources. So our prioritizing is around the distributing health goods, providing that health promotion, health education equally and equity, and deciding which populations will obtain the available health goods and services. So we prioritize those things when we're looking at the value of equity and how our practice delivers equity. Respect. All of our principles surround or value respect, treating people as unique, equal, responsible, moral agents, and each person's participation in the community is valuable. Again, important for health nurse professionals to clarify their value of respect. because sometimes it is challenging for us in the face of people who have not been taking their medications or not consistent with their treatment, people who are homeless, people who are criminals, people who are in another category that we don't necessarily value as a society, or who are marginalized in our society. So, other ethical principles, and I want you to star this, what's autonomy? People have the freedom of choice and to exercise their rights. Autonomy, individual rights. Is that a value? And if so, then you're going to be expressing that in your behavior. But it's also important to realize, too, exercising the rights as long as their choices do not harm others. Autonomy in the face of our individual rights as long as they don't harm others. Beneficence, doing good or taking action to promote well-being. Think about the social distancing, thinking about masking, thinking about all the things we're doing in the face of the pandemic. Non-malfeasance, how do we do no harm? What's should we do, and what should our behavior to adhere to non-malfeasance or do no harm, ensuring your choices do not harm others? And then, of course, justice is the fair distribution of benefits and costs to everyone, equal access to health care. So please review those ethical principles. In your book, there are examples of a situation where it reflects each one of these values, so you could be able to recognize, if I give you a particular situation, what would be the ethical principle that is creating the ethical decision-making process. Then veracity, telling the truth. Truth-telling involves treating clients as equals and telling them the truth, not withholding any information. Fidelity, keeping your promises, involves issues of trust and trustworthiness. So one of the things that I try to do as a faculty member is be as transparent as possible in terms of grading criteria by putting it all in the syllabus, going over it in orientation, and also responding back to you as a student. If you send me a question by email or text, I want to respond to you within that 24-hour to be seen as trustworthy as possible, responding back. So that is examples of fidelity. As nurses, how do we do that? If we tell a patient at the bedside that we are going to get them an answer before the end of our shift, do you in fact do that? Because it's going to have implications for your trustworthiness as a nurse. And then our ethical standards and guidelines. Public health agencies often have established protocols for ethical decision making, but I also want to say that your hospital organization will have these established protocols as well. So you, as you enter the workforce, you may want to look at those policies, procedures, protocol that will guide you in making some of those decisions at the bedside or with other health professionals. Some healthcare agencies have ethics committees, and I believe most large healthcare organizations will have those. And public health nurses should understand their agency's policies related to ethical decision making and consider where they stand on these moral and ethical issues, certainly when giving care. So again, it would behoove you to think about this before you start working for an organization. What does an organization value? And then how do those values play out daily, and how do you as a nurse then reflect those values? If upon entering an organization you do not agree with their values, then it may not be an organization that you want to be connected with. And the ethics committees, I wanted to go back to that because many organizations do have those, and it may be something that you as a nurse want to be a part of because they certainly do need nursing representation on there. So that's something else for you can consider, particularly if you really associate with the values of that healthcare organization. Okay, so that's it. I think I went over pretty much what would be on the exam. If you have any questions, of course, give me shoot me an email or a text to let me know. And of course, we will do a content review before exam one, which includes covering the concepts that I will be testing over on this module. Thank you very much.